I was just pulling together the script on Crew Ellington. He has so many great, just he's like in an airport. He's like, and when the enemy's attacking, and they're just like praying tongues over this lady. And the whole comment section is like, "What is happening?" He's like, "Well, we didn't see anything. We just felt the devil's presence at the airport." And you're like, nothing was happening.
I often feel the devil's presence at the airport.
It's true that
That's over.
Spirit Airlines is his airline.
Exactly. The spirit of being overwhelmed is upon me. I rebuke.
The spirit of flight cancellations, I rebuke you with the blood of Jesus. For all the segments, I loaded them in here, and they'll look like... See if I can play this here.
I found one of the most effective ways to engage them on different beliefs.
Oh, trigger warning.
So some of them are like 20 seconds to a minute long. We might pause throughout, and then we can just kind of talk about whatever. Has anybody seen the entire talk?
God, are you kidding me? No.
No.
I've seen like a quarter of it.
I'll add some commentary in there throughout because I cut out a lot of things to get it down. So I might add in some little fun facts here and there, sprinkle them in.
I was kind of shocked listening to it. Like, it was so succinct. It was like, what else did he even say? This was an hour-long talk. So what?
That's kind of how Catholics are.
It's true.
And what is the context? So we should maybe lay the context for what this is, like where this talk took place.
Like, this he didn't give a ton of context other than it's for YAF, which tells you everything you need to know about
YAF.
Young American
Freedom. This is like the Charlie Kirk group.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
It's an inherently political organization that they just like farm in various speakers to talk to a bunch of edgy high schooler and college.
I see the list of speakers. The list of speakers included Michael Knowles and Matt Walsh, and just like what colleges like can afford Matt Walsh now that he's a documentary filmmaker.
Who ties?
I'm award-winning. My whole family went.
Well,
how do we want to start this out is the real question.
Well, ostensibly, what's the thesis of his talk before we start? Like, why are we responding to this? Like, what's the deal?
The thesis of his talk is that these questions show that the liberals have no coherent worldview, but the Catholic Church does. There's more or less the point of his talk, that he basically says it's not that liberals can't answer these, it's that the question is basically exposed that the atheist worldview is so utterly incoherent and crazy. And I'll do a little intro on Trent Horn's form of arguments before we hop in, because that's part of the intro. Trent Horn is a very specific style. But yeah. Do I do the intro? Colin, do you want to do the intro? Ben, Veronica, anybody?
Okay, you're the professional.
Professionals. Well, this shall be our starting point. I've been recording 8 minutes of us blabbering. Should I do a fake Catholic Answers intro? Steal their background music?
That would be funny.
We just invert it, put the waveform upside down.
what we need to do is we need to appropriate Father Justin, the apologetics AI priest, and we need to get him in here. We need to get him to say some crazy stuff.
That would be funny.
I think he's just Justin now.
Oh my god.
You missed that?
No, apologetics AI priest.
I think during COVID.
It's fun.
Yeah, I think it was during COVID, right? Where
I'm just taking notes of things to
AI.
look up later.
It was after COVID, but it was like when the whole AI thing was blowing up and like ChatGPT was blowing up. They were like, what if we had a Catholic ChatGPT? And so they made one, and they called it Father Justin. But then people were like, hey, Father Justin, can you hear my confession? And he was like, absolutely, I can hear your confession. And they were like, oh, no. They had to shut Father Justin down. They had to laicite, unfortunately.
giving people absolution, yeah.
He's been forcibly laicized.
I definitely did see that and thought it was just a meme that people like photoshopped.
Oh, really happened.
And put on
The
it.
mainstream media picked it up. Like, it was funny enough that CNN reported on it.
I'm just waiting for someone to be like one of those YouTubers that just use like the anime 3D anime faces, but of their new little mascot, the little raincoat mascot.
Oh,
they're all Luce. Yeah, the music Luce are kind of funny, I gotta say.
She's great.
Just like her axe murdering demons. It's great, but I don't know.
Like Father Mike Schmitz, we don't put our bronzer on before recording, so
Yeah, apologies.
yeah. So if we don't look as good, mea culpa. Anywho, today's video is from the one and only Trent Horn, made famous for having to call out other online apologists for denying the Holocaust recently. He also put out a wonderful video called 7 Questions Liberals Can't Answer at Young Americans for Freedom, which is a political, not specifically religious forum. And this whole video is like the Catholic language, except he's just going on random conservative talking points. He's not actually doing a ton of apologetics. And so his thesis of the video is that it's not that that liberals can't give any answers. It's that we can't give any coherent worldview and everything's relativistic. And if we just submit it to the church, everything would be fine and dandy because we have amazing definitions for everything. So I'll start kind of his intro. And Trent Horn has a very specific arguing style. So I'll just kind of play a little bit of his intro where he talks about how he communicates around issues.
I found one of the most effective ways to engage them on different beliefs, whether it was the issue of abortion or religion or the value of Western civilization, moral relativism, was to ask a series of questions. When you ask questions, it takes you out of the hot seat and it puts you into the driver's seat.
So Trent Horn...
He thinks he invented the Socratic method. It's nice. I'm happy for him.
Yeah.
That must be
He
nice.
talks about the Socratic method. And on Catholic Answers, he always talks about his 2 tactics are the Socratic method and basically reducing things to the absurd are really the only two tools in his toolbox. One, the Socratic method, is he wants clear answers because he already has the drop on people. He's rehearsed all of his definitions, so it makes him look good. If you have to think, then he's like, no, I got this perfect answer here. And then basically reductio ad absurdum. He just like pushes worldviews as if the Catholic worldview isn't absurd when you actually ask questions. But that's Trent Horn's like disingenuous debate tactics that he uses all the freaking time.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I think Catholics especially were taught all the common questions and we're taught very simple, quick answers, and we're taught to value having an answer over thinking about it. And I think that's sort of emblematic of his entire argument style.
Because a lot of these questions they're questions that you should think about, but the church has been workshopping quick answers for 2,000 years. And debates are less about, do we have actually 2 ideas interfacing, going back and forth? And debates are much more about the optics of it. And so in many forums, Catholics can seem that they come across confident because you ask them a question, they've been workshopping that shit since they were 7, and they just, boom, you got an answer. I mean, as soon as you stop to think, it's like, oh, Charlie Kirk's going to make an edit of you. Any other commentary on our lovely Trent Horn?
I love how he always has to put in the Western civilization bit. Like, there's always that little, like, he just has to add that.
A little bit.
Because it's, I mean, if it zooms out at one point and you can see his audience and it's all like frat boys, like sitting in the front row. So it's like he has to mention Western civilization. There's no other recourse.
We just need to all buy dog whistles, and we hear dog whistles, we all just blow them into our microphones. Because Western civilization is not like in the contributions from South American Catholicism or the African continent and recent converts or anywhere else. It's Western civilization, which means only one thing in apologetics world. But shall we jump into our questions here that we're not going to be able to answer, folks. So if you're looking for an answer, you probably shouldn't listen to us.
Get ready.
Times the issue of socialism will come up on college campuses. I wrote a book that you heard about in the introduction, Can a Catholic Be a Socialist? Which is amazing because you have people like Pope Pius XI and others being very clear, saying in the 1930s, no good Catholic can be a true socialist.
So, like, off the bat, we're just going right into politics. Like, this is supposed to be a Catholic apologist. He's supposed to have God's wisdom. And this whole section, and for people listening, this is an hour-long talk. And he spends a lot of this first question just lobbing conservative talking points out there, which I think can be debated. But he's just this Catholic apologist, this religious guy throwing out secular conservative arguments from the 80s. It's like, these people are here to take over the government. Like,
well, that's the first thing, right? He's like, can a Catholic be a socialist? I'm like, well, historically, many Catholics have been socialists. Like, many very famous Catholics have been socialists. I mean, Dorothy Day is a very famous Catholic. Distributism is an entire socialist philosophy that is explicitly Catholic in its construction and outlook on society. There's a vibrant culture of aren't there, like, the Catholic Worker is a paper. There's like a long history of socialist Catholic activism. The entire liberation theology movement is essentially born out of Catholic and socialist interfacing. During a lot of the right-wing authoritarian regimes in South America, the most vocal resistance were from socialist priests and other religious members who were brutally killed by a lot of these regimes. So just to dismiss all of that out hand and say, well, Pope Pius said you can't do it, so it's impossible. Like, okay, Trent, sure.
He goes on to explain that the language is no good Catholic can be a true socialist, which is like being a good Catholic is just whatever the Vatican says. It's not, if you were to do a poll of who Catholics are or self-described Catholics, it's just if you line up with Catholic teaching, you line up with Catholic teaching, which is just this funny argument where he's like, well, if you agree with the Vatican, you agree with the Vatican. And you're like, thank you so much for your wonderful contributions.
Yeah, I will say the word true and the word good are doing a lot of work there. Like true socialism and a good Catholic. Like, okay, yeah.
You know what Pope Pius also said in the early 1900s? That girls should only wear long skirts and always cover their head in church. And you know what we don't do anymore? That. So who cares what Pope Pius said in the 1930s?
Girl, some of us still do.
I mean,
some of us are still living the real word.
I understand.
Some of us don't have guitars in Mass, Veronica.
Yes, but still. Okay, no, you're right. My point didn't hold up. Never mind. But still. Never changed their mind about anything ever.
Never.
Right. Yeah.
Developed.
Except when it declared things that look one way, what they really meant was actually the opposite of what we just recently declared. Yeah. If you squint hard enough, the Catholic Church has never gone back on anything.
List. 9 times out of 10, the person will not give you the correct definition of the term socialism. Instead, they'll vaguely describe the Nordic economic model. I think one of the biggest flaws in socialism is it tries to make government the basis of society. It's not government that's the foundation of society. It's not the individual. What is it? It's the family. The family is the foundation of society. That's why early socialists and socialists today have wanted to abolish the family.
So much.
For context, after that, he immediately gives the example of socialists wanting to destroy the family by there's a state that tried to outlaw homeschooling, and that's the biggest attack on the family Trent can think of, is that the socialists said maybe we shouldn't be able to homeschool people on our rural farms and not give them birth certificates. But
I just want to acknowledge, I want to ask first, does he in the longer video ever give a definition of socialism?
I believe he gives the definition of it's basically the government controlling the economy, and that his argument is, well, the government's just not great at administrating things. Like, he's like, well, if you try to mail something in the UPS versus the USPS, there's a huge difference. Which is like, and then he talks about a few government-ran organizations where he's just like, the government's not good at controlling the means of production. It's just like this 10-minute incoherent rant, which really isn't apologetics. It's just conservative talking points masquerading as Catholic apologetics, as if the church has deep spiritual wisdom from the 1990 Republican platform.
Yeah, I also want to draw the attention that this video is about liberals, right? He's talking to liberals. who are not socialist by definition.
It's a very great.
Love the first question. It's great. A great start.
Can he define a liberal?
I could a discrete definition. Well, yeah. No.
Or could he define woke?
Well, no. They never can. But I don't know. Like, socialism is pretty straightforward. It's pretty simple. For those who don't know what socialism is, it's just when the means of producing goods are collectively owned by the people producing the goods, and the trading of things as commodities is not the universal standard. That's socialism. So the government does not come into that definition whatsoever. Government is a method by which some people have and do try to enact collective ownership of things, but it's not the only method. It's a type of socialism. So it's just, I don't know. It's interesting that, like, when conservatives try to define things and complain that liberals can't define things, like, they also don't seem to have a very clear, coherent view of, like, what these ideologies are and what they mean or how they're lived out or developed and practiced. And I could go on.
It's also just a mute point where if somebody's like, oh yeah, we need more socialism, and you're like, what do you mean? And you're like, oh, we should have a greater social safety net. It's like, then the definition isn't a great gotcha question. It's like, oh, so then let's talk about the policies. Like, the rest of these questions that Trent puts out are more gotcha type questions. This one's just like defining terms, but it seemed to him, I guess it's a gotcha. But then also, even the title of the video, like we said, liberal is really just this boogeyman. And he starts to talk opening, like, socialism is talked a lot about on college campuses. And you're like, not really. Like the conservative view of the American college campus is you show up and you get your mandatory pride flag and your mandatory condom, and then you go to your mandatory gender studies class, and then you dye your hair and burn down a building. And that's your freshman orientation right there. It is just like, yeah, it's like, I have no doubt a lot of things are discussed in college campuses, but I don't think this liberal, woke, like, boogeyman on college campuses is even happening.
It's not nearly as common as he is making it out to be. I mean, I went to a very small school, so it was a lot of very conservative people. And it just, like, what was I going to say? Oh, I wanted to bring up the fact that he brings up the Nordic economic system. Yeah, just so fascinating. Like, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean? Do you mean, like, the social safety nets? Do you mean, like, the cost of, like, pickled herring, or, you know, like, whatever people in Nordic countries eat? Like what does he mean? And also, like, what facets of this economic system to him means socialism? Because I've heard this a ton of times, like, of conservatives bringing up, like, Switzerland and Sweden, and, like, they always bring it up as, like, this horrible demonic socialist wasteland, and it's like, I don't know, it seems like they're doing pretty good, sis. Like, I don't know.
Well, Trent Horn brings up the point that, well, actually there's more billionaires per capita in Finland. It's just, you really clearly listened to a few Ben Shapiro talking points. Like, he's bringing nothing new to this discussion as a crazy, amazing Catholic apologist. And so it's probably best to move on to some of these next questions, which are more like Catholic-ish. This one, I just find it funny because he's very clearly just, I'm conservative and gonna throw my Catholic credentials in the circle to regurgitate talking points, which weren't a discussion, but it's like, so for him, Catholic doesn't mean like, oh, I have like a spiritual home and go there on the weekends. It's like, this is our dogmatic view of approaching the world and we should control everything, is really what Trent Horn's whole shtick here is if we just gave the government that little Catholic knowledge that the Catholic Church hides, this to use the Mormon term, pearl of great price, but actually it turns out the Catholics are the ones with it. It would be so much better if they just discovered theology of the body. Like, it'd be so much better. Yes, we're running the government according to Christopher West's condom-colored glasses.
I also wanted to say, I said Switzerland, I meant Sweden. So before anybody comes for me, I know that Switzerland is not a Nordic country. Thank you.
Are you ready for question 2 or any final points, Colin, our resident socialist?
Listen, I could go on forever. Even the thing you said about the billionaires in Finland, like, that could be a whole tangent, but you're right. We should move on to Catholic.
That's what this whole video is. He's just like throwing shit out there. It's just, it's such a funny talk. If somebody's listening to this, listen to the whole thing, because it's even worse. I made him sound like coherent, have a train of thought. His talk is just chasing butterflies, straight butterflies around the YAF building. Just to clarify,
monasteries,
these rainbow colored.
What are monasteries if not socialist communities?
Honestly. So what's his point?
Literally. What does Acts of the Apostles say? Like, and they had all things in common.
Yes.
No, but the government can't do that. It's inefficient. Have you ever seen the post office?
It's inefficient because America's so huge.
Wonderful system, though. Well, there's that.
Yeah.
Huge, one might even say.
Huge, bigly. It's big and huge. All right, question two.
The second is, what is marriage? I've seen reality television shows online and on Netflix and other places with polyamorous couples, polygamous couples. Why is that to be two?
It does.
Which, first of all, is he watching whatever that one TLC shows where it's like 20-year-old guys and like 60-year-old girls? I think what Trent's watching.
MILF Manor?
Yeah. MILF Manor. I think that's what he's watching. Anywho, that's just a funny point where he brings that up.
So how should we define marriage then? I like the definition from William B. May, a moral theologian. Marriage is that which unites men and women to one another and to any children that proceed from their union. Marriage is not something that just Bust invented or
What a terrible definition. I'm sorry, because by that, first of all, the men and women thing is arbitrary there, because you could just as easily say marriage is that which unites two people to their children. And that would also describe what secular people believe, which is marriage is a contract that you write and sign with another person. That's all it is.
My favorite thing about all of these questions, if you're listening, is in every question he says something to the degree of, I like the definition of, or I prefer the definition of. He always throws in this subjective label of, this person says this, and I think that's a good definition. It's like he gives away the entire shtick as soon as like, and I like the definition of blank. It's like, no, I agree that we can have different definitions of things and we can think about things differently and that everything's not objective. And he's in the same camp just with a really terrible definition. I'll keep playing this here and then we can respond to more of it.
arbitrary concept. It is a universal norm. You can't redefine marriage just like you can't redefine friendship or justice. It's
What does that mean? What does that mean? Because there are different definitions for both of those words. What do you
And our understanding of those words has evolved greatly over time. What we built this 3,000 years
basic
ago.
natural good created from he who gave us all the goods in the universe. So
He's also giving away the shtick that this is everything in his world is just theocracy. All of these definitions, he says something to the degree of, and because God said so. Just all of these definitions, you're like, but then he wants these definitions used for the purposes of government. So you're like, so theocracy? And his answer would be, well, technically yes, but then give kind of a waffling answer.
But who is he from who all things flow? Is it John Cena? Like, I just can imagine him like going into. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's just. This is it's we're already inching towards the teleology of it all.
Inching.
And we're already there. But it's like he gets in the next few questions, he'll get like deeper and deeper into it, especially when it comes to like intersex people and things of that. But like it's just keep going.
these marriage radicals, are you saying infertile couples, if they don't have children, are losers? Like a losing baseball team? No. But this view of marriage is the only one that explains why their infertility is a genuine loss that they feel.
So this, I cut out a few points there. He has this long baseball analogy. He's like, well, if you're in your backyard throwing a baseball around, is that really like it's this word salad? But and then he makes this point where he's like, well, I wouldn't ever be sad if I can't fly because I wasn't endowed with wings. And just like gay couples, they can't make children. They shouldn't be sad that they can't have children, which is just, he just goes down these rabbit holes that like nobody talks about these things except for weird people on Catholic Answers Forum, RIP.
So he said that marriage radical
Because
he said marriage radicals complain about infertile couples and how, are they not really married? No, that's stupid because they're validly sad. Okay.
Like, that was his whole argument.
what? First of all,
You didn't answer the question.
the marriage radicals.
Yeah.
Speaking of the marriage radical, I don't complain about infertile couples. I think they should get married, and that's lovely. He's the one who thinks they couldn't get married. Like, what? And also, like, he's the one who's prescribing, like, that childbirthing ability be this essential part of marriage. And he's like, well, the only reason people feel sad about it is because everyone's supposed to have kids, but also gay people shouldn't feel sad because they're not supposed to have kids. It's like, well, then shouldn't infertile people not feel sad because they're not supposed to have kids? So where's, like, I don't know. So much of it is just having a definition he wants marriage to be, and then being like, everything else that doesn't fit that is wrong because God, and he's trying to dress that up.
Again, it's the teleology. It's him knowing or believing that we're all oriented towards a Catholic heterosexual marriage, and believing that anything that deviates is the cause of unhappiness. Which, by the way, they'll say this, and then they'll say, when you complain that you're not happy as a Catholic, they'll be like, but we don't promise you happiness in this life. Yeah, so that's for the next life, baby.
The world will promise that to you. We don't lie to you. We promise you fulfillment or whatever.
So am I going to be happy or not? What is the answer? Anyway.
The world says you are called to comfort, but I say you're called to greatness, and greatness involves, like, perforated condoms for your fertility treatment. Trent Horn has a longer video where he's critiquing Matt Walsh's interaction with Joe Rogan on gay marriage, where Matt is just struggling because Joe's like, well, I can't, and Matt just has these terrible answers. And then Trent Horn has this, he likes to use definitions very legalistically, which is funny because when we look at marriage if somebody were to define what marriage is, it's a legal contract between two people for an exchange of rights and property inheritance. And so when we look at marriage, it's like, what is marriage? Well, it's going to be if one spouse passes away, property is assumed to go to the other for purposes of estate planning. You're going to have presumed fatherhood or motherhood. You're going to have a set of rights when it comes to minor children. You're going to have healthcare business. Like, there's a bunch of very specific things in law that marriage confers. And so whenever all these the real marriage radicals, which are the Trent Horns and Jason Everetts of the world, when they're like, so what about three people? And it's like, how would the legal rights work? Which is like, I think that's a cool conversation, but now we're talking about a different set of rights because it's really the legal institution of marriage is just between two people, a set of rights that's conferred, and we can name it whatever we want, we can change it however we want, and it's not this like Catholics are big on this. Well, this is just an institution that's always existed for forever and just like written in our human hearts, and we're just kind of like feeling around in the dark trying to figure out what this thing is that already exists versus, hey, the legal institution wasn't around 10,000 years ago when we were hitting each other with clubs for woolly mammoths, so like maybe marriage has evolved since we've been clobbering each other like the Flintstones.
Well, it's also okay. So within Catholic scriptural and historical tradition, marriage has been different things at different times. Like, if you have to say what is marriage, Solomon had how many wives and concubines? What was different about them? How were they wives versus concubines? Oh, well, that time marriage was different. Oh, okay. So it can be socially renegotiated as cultural norms change. Yeah. Okay. I don't know.
Dan, this updates a Kremlin.
But that's why I think, like,
Revelation.
it's like sort of gotcha. Like, why can't multiple people get married?
That's true.
True.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm gonna shut off the stream after that one.
I don't know, the whole gotcha they try to do, like, why can't multiple people get married? It's like, yeah, like, I don't think that should be a problem. Like, if people want to enter into a contract with each other, like, they should be able to do that. I frankly think that's like a limitation that our system has that it shouldn't. But I don't know, maybe I'm too radical or whatever. But like, it's just such a weird like gotcha that he tries to send in. Like, oh, I watched this reality show where there was like polyamory. It's like, yeah, a lot of people live with polyamorous lives and they're fine. Like, wow. I don't know. And that happened
Him
in my
and Laura Horn were just on the couch watching Love Island. Like, he's like, no, honey, it's for research. This was on his Catholic dancer's laptop, just on Netflix, watching Too Hot to Handle, taking notes. It's like, no, I've been truth that it's on company time. And then Christopher checks his $400,000 paycheck. You know, the president of Catholic Answers makes $400,000 a year. That's another funny whole rabbit hole.
Yep. Really?
Catholic Answers has that much
Another, like,
money?
we need to fundraise. Yeah, they have a lot of money, but they do these big fundraisers. And they're like, we need $400,000 for this nonprofit to continue. We have a matching grant from somebody from Domino's Pizza. Please donate. And you're like, so it's just going to Christopher Check's paycheck. Like, what are we doing here?
That's a whole salary. Cool. All their salaries are public because it's technically a charity, right? Yeah.
I looked in tax paperwork and found Scott Hahn's salary. A few years ago, he made $650K in 1 year. So that was between his Franciscan University salary, which included what they paid him for being a teacher and what they paid him for like talks and stuff, and benefits for like his kid's tuition who was there at the time. So that was like $180K, and then it was about $400K it was whatever amount from his group, the St. Paul Center that he created. Wow. So it shows like the top salaries. He had the most at like, I think it was maybe like 450. So maybe it's more like 600. Sorry, I think it's like 600K, 450 or whatever. But the next top salary at St. Paul Center is like 100K. And he gets like 400K.
So too late to repent?
Well, he just does $300,000 more work than the rest of them, clearly.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's with all his books that, you know.
This is who I think they don't want socialism.
So, exactly.
Oh, he does. He goes right.
No, well, people ghostwrite for him. Sorry, like I have that confirmed from people.
Oh, really?
And apparently, he got in a big fight with his like main buddy, and Buddy, of course, got angry because his name wasn't on any of the books, and Scott's getting all this credit and money, and he quit. And apparently, Scott like didn't publish books for like 2 years, so you can like track the record. And now he has a new one. Emily Chapman writes his books, but yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I heard this from
Sweetie, it's a whole other live stream. Screw these guys.
This is all alleged. This is all alleged. This is alleged.
Yeah. It's Veronicas opinion that
This is not an actionable soul.
Valerie is legit. I followed Valerie in line. But look for yourself.
Veronica discovered.
when I was super Catholic, I gave my mom Scott Hahn's book, Hope to Die, and she read it, and she just was like asking me for any proof about how we're gonna have these resurrected supernatural bodies and be able to go through walls and look at each other peeing or whatever you do in heaven. And it's just like she was so confused, and I started to like, well, we just like know it. Like, obviously you're gonna have a glorified body. Duh, who doesn't know this? And you can't spread your ashes at Disneyland. Like, obviously God told us that. She kept grilling me, and I was like, ooh, maybe this apologetics thing isn't too great. And Scott Hahn, Rome, sweet Rome himself, doesn't actually know what we're talking about.
To be fair, Scott Hahn, that one I can get from a biblical standpoint because Paul talks about it and then Jesus does it. But I see your point. Well, okay.
Well, that's question 3, I think. Shall we?
Yeah.
This helps us answer the next question liberals have a hard time with. Number 3. What is sex for? And the answer is usually I got something like, well, it's for emotions and it bonds people together and it's a way to show love. One woman did say, though, she said it's not for anything.
First of all, he talks about
icon, the legend, and she is the moment.
He talks about this story. Do you remember the blog post where he's like interviewing people at Balboa Park in San Diego Pride about what sex is for? And he has all these like, and I think I got them. Like, if we just kept talking, I would have had a great gotcha moment, which is like, you're talking to a bunch of queer folks in a park in San Diego, which also is another thing he's doing on company time. Not only is he watching Too Hot to Handle, he's also talking to absolute queens in the park about sex. Like, oh, somebody's got to look at this man's salary. Anywho,
it's just whatever you want it to be for. If it's just about if what sex is for is just sharing emotions, or if it's not for anything at all, why is infidelity such a big deal? Why is it such a big deal? We're not as devastated by that. There's something deeper. So what is the deeper answer? Because people will
the answer that the other lady gave him answers that question. The whole like, what she says, it's for whatever you want it to be for. Why do we feel so about infidelity? Because people want sex to be for a part of a meaningful monogamous relationship a lot of the time. That's what they want it to be for a lot of the time. And so it's bad when someone goes outside those lines. Like, it's in the answer. Sex is what you want it to be for. It is an activity you can do for fun, for emotional bonding, for physical intimacy, for making kids. It can do a lot of things. But it's whatever you want it to be. I don't know. Like, he defeated his own gotcha.
The weird part about this question is, what is sex for? Sex is basically the noun in this sentence, which is like, as if sex could say something. A better question is, what do people use sex for? Because people are actual agents that can talk about what they're using things for. Now, the question itself is a question that doesn't actually work because sex can't say anything. Sex isn't, it's not an agent that we can interact with. Versus we go, what do people use sex for is a much better discussion. And for some couples, intimacy is a huge thing. Because it's like if you and your spouse had your favorite activity in the world, going out on a sailboat, and that was like what your relationship was about, and you found your spouse was going sailing with other people and you'd agreed on it, like you'd be more devastated than if they went to the ice cream shop. Like, sex for many people is a very special thing. But also for a lot of people, it's not. Like, I don't know if Trent Horn's ever walked up to a house with a pineapple in the front door and a bowl for the keys, but like, some people that aren't having a breakdown every time they see the upside down pineapple on a Royal Caribbean cruise.
Yeah.
Answer, because people will turn it around on you, right? They'll say, well, okay, what do you think sex is for? This is the answer that I prefer. Sex is for, are you waiting? The expression of marital love. That is what it's for. If sex was just for
once again, the language of what the definition that I like is like, oh, wait, that's the whole game? Like, there's like 10 seconds left here.
Emotional, it's a good way of expressing emotions. It makes people feel more united. Well, then sex, by that definition, then sex should be great for friendships. It messes things up because that's not what it...
First of all, I don't think he's ever had gay friends because that is a big part of gay friendships for a lot of people. So... Then, secondly, what, like, this whole, like, thing that he's saying, like, my definition that I prefer is literally what that one lady said. Sex is for whatever you want it to be. He's saying, I want sex to be for this.
That's so
it's like,
true.
plus, he says you get to decide what you want to do with it. That's why.
And your definition of sex relies on the expression of marital love. It goes back to rely on the definition he prefers from William May about marriage. So he didn't convince me on the marriage thing. He's not convincing me on the purpose of sex thing,
Yep. That's where this is just a weird question where, once again, sex can't be the noun of this sentence. We can say, what do people use sex for? And Trent could say, for a lot of people, sex is for the expression of marital love. And it's like, cool. Like, we have a claim that we can now investigate. Can we find people who say that? And the answer is like, awesome. Or if somebody says sex is for a fun activity, that's now a falsifiable claim that we can go out and see if that's what people use sex for. And then we can also say, and in society, these particular things are illegal. Once again, we now have a falsifiable claim that we can actually investigate versus this just assertion, sex is for this, or marriage is for this. These aren't falsifiable. These aren't investigated anywhere. These are just some man in the 4th century who was really horny writing stuff down on a scribe and then just passed through the generations, workshopped a little bit, polished up a little bit here and there, and now you have a shiny turd at the Catholic Answer studio.
And I would actually argue that your way of phrasing the question is actually more Catholic because it's more person oriented. So like his way of asking the question is like more problematic to my Catholic ears than your way of phrasing the question. It makes much more sense for it to be a person oriented question.
But they're big on teleology is kind of like this Platonic view of the world of forms out there, as if sex is just like this idea that exists in Plato's world, and then we're just kind of like feeling around in our dreams, trying to like feel the edges of this container, which is a particular word, which is just a collection of sounds coming out of our mouths, which doesn't sound too objective when we think about it. It's just encoding and decoding by people. And Trent has this long shtick. I don't know if you guys have ever heard it, where he'll ask, like, what is sex? Not what is sex for, but like, what is sex? And he wants like these very precise definitions. And he'll go into like, well, if sex is just the penetration of an orifice, when the dentist puts his finger in my mouth to clean my teeth, is that sex? Like, what are we? It's the weirdest line of questioning on planet Earth.
That's
Like, do you not know
yes.
what sex is, Trent? No, that was exactly what I was going to say. Sex sounds just like a platonic ideal in the sky that we'll never actually be able to see what it actually is. We just try to have a pale imitation of it. So then why are you complaining that my pale imitation isn't as good as your pale imitation? We're never going to actually know what the platonic ideal in the sky is for sex.
Divine revelation has told us that sex is
Sorry, I
any
forgot.
queen v missionary between a married couple.
Anyway, this is a whole rabbit hole. Shall we move to the next question?
Please.
So this leads to my next question that that liberals have a hard time answering.
I just thought the smirk on his face is the funniest thing. He really thought he ate with all these questions.
Look at the front row.
I know.
Look at the front row. Look at the front row.
Yeah.
Continue.
I'm answering. What is a woman? Or what is a man? So notice how all of this sorts of tie together, right? Now, many...
Once again,
I'm a
we're
woman.
drawing points between things that aren't connected.
What's the definition?
What is that? You are not here for woman. We ask you to leave. Like, oh. We have the trailer memo.
Now, many defenders of this view will try to turn the question around on us to say, well, you can't answer it either because of complexities in chromosomes, in hormonal development, in biology, physiology, anatomy. The other trap is if you simply say, well, a woman is someone who has, for among humans, a female is anyone with XX chromosomes, and a male is anyone with XY chromosomes. That's a bad answer because there are people with chromosomal abnormalities.
They're learning.
They're evolving. Their definition is evolving. If only there was a world in which definitions could change as we get more data and have dialogue.
So my biology brain went off with this, because in a couple can you play for just a couple seconds, maybe towards the end?
There's 20 seconds left, and then that's the end.
Intelligence. I prefer something a little bit broader. So what is a woman? I would say a woman is a member of the human species naturally ordered towards gestation and ovum production. We can see what you are ordered towards, and then we can identify that within the genetic makeup, the physiological makeup. There may be like 4 cases, rare cases in literature where we really aren't sure. But that doesn't mean...
Oh, wait, no, he said the last thing he says, that doesn't mean the binary isn't real. It's like you just disproved the binary by saying your exception.
I was immediately shot back to sophomore genetics class. I need to read something. So what he's talking about are called aneuploidies, which are different numbers of sex chromosomes. Things like Turner syndrome, Klinefelter syndrome, XYY syndrome, and XXX syndrome, which have birth frequency. I'm using this site called UpToDate, which is great for medical professionals. They have these disorders have frequencies of 1 in 2,500, which is Turner syndrome, 1 in 500 to 1 in 1,000, which is Klinefelter syndrome, 1 in 850 to 1 in 3,000, XYY, or 1 in 1,000, which is XXX. I'm sorry, these are not 4 instances in the literature. This is a huge population of people. Huge. And he's just saying, well, whatever, like we can just bat these people away. There's a huge community of chromosomally intersex people, and first of all, it's insulting to say it like that. Second of all, it's like it just baffles me. It baffles me that like this is even something he's bringing up as a point, because it's like there's so many other better points against like the gender binary than like just immediately throwing intersex people into the conversation. There's so many other points to talk about. But that made me so upset.
Well,
You immediately went there.
I also think it's worth like pointing out his whole like, okay, because he was saying like, hey, there's all these people with different chromosomes, but he was saying like, oh, they don't really even count because it's all about whether you're ordered towards producing certain, and it's like, well, their bodies are producing whatever they're ordered to produce. Like, what do you mean? You know, like it assumes this like objective ideal state of man that everyone is a certain degrees away from. And then you're getting into some pretty like eugenicsy sort of like, what's the ideal human? And like, what is their perfect level of ovum production or whatever? Oh, well, you're defective by 0.5%. So you're like 5% less of a woman. It starts to get really weird. And he'll say, no, that's not what I mean. I just mean like teleologically you're ordered towards producing these like whatever. And it's like, first of all, we're back to teleology again, which is not a science. It's just your vibes and you're asserting them. But it's also just like his whole idea of like, oh, there's only like 4 people that have ever been indeterminate sexually, which is like just not true. Even aside from the chromosomal frequencies, there's like plenty of other different intersex conditions and people can have any combination. And like you said, that's not even what gender is. And that's not even what, like when people say, what is a woman? Usually we're discussing social roles, not biological roles. They're the ones that always bring it to biology for some reason.
Well, the key words that I want people listening to remember is where he says a few gray cases don't vacate his definition, which is the whole point of, and so this is where I would differ with Trent Horn, in that Trent Horn's big on like these set definitions that are objective and unchanging and have to be these perfect square little boxes. And then in this case, he's like, well, our box is kind of like vague and really out there, but like I just have an assertion. And the big thing here that I think it gets missed in the discussion is instead of these definitions that are just out there, like what is a diagnostic criteria if somebody comes in and they are genuinely unsure what their sex is? Like what characteristics would we look at? When we look at sex, it's a bimodal distribution and ordered towards, like no doctor is going to like have you go through a genetic test and be like, so what is your body ordered towards? And then do a physical evaluation. Like you're ordered towards ovum production or impregnation. Like these aren't falsifiable definitions. These aren't things we can interact with. These are talking points. But he's the one that wants these objective definitions. If you say like, what is a woman? I think it depends on in what context are we talking about. We can come up with a lot of definitions and not going to be perfectly encompassing, but that's because language is imperfect. But in Trent's world, he needs these absolute definitions that can never change, except these definitions we can't interact with. You can't go to the doctor and like he pulls out the Summa and is like, well, so if we look at your chromosomes and your physical anatomy, the Summa said, what are we talking about?
Yeah. It just, this like teleological science thing, it excludes so many people, and it really like
it renders people with just like different bodies as like somehow defective or deviant or wrong or imperfect, which is just, nature makes no moral judgments on this kind of thing, you know?
Right.
They're just who they are. And you're the one ascribing them some sort of defect or failure because they're not living up to your platonic ideal that you created in your head.
He's making it sound like there's a, like, in people with these chromosomal abnormalities or chromosomal differences, I prefer chromosomal differences, like, he's making it sound like they're just failed men or failed women, when that's not the case at all. It's just differences in how the chromosomes shuffle when you're forming. And so that is just it goes back to, like, in preparation for this, I was like looking at what people were saying, because I had read something about how Thomas Aquinas had mentioned something about hermaphrodism, which was the word back then. And I was looking
That's
for
the word I
or
learned in my college
Thomas
class,
talking
by
about
the way.
I am 100% believe it. But in this forum, they were like, well, he doesn't really ever talk about hermaphrodites, but he does talk about monsters. And I was like,
oh, well, there you go.
like, just that It's very this vibe. It's very that vibe of like, well, it's the same with homosexuality. It's like you are ordered in this way. If you are not ordered in this way, you are disordered, and that's just period. It's
Period. And we can so because
Everyone else is ordered.
You,
But
the only
yeah.
it's funny in the Catholic world. There's so much literature around what does it mean to be a man or what does it mean to be a woman. There's entire books, entire manuals around the social roles and the responsibilities and the etiquette and the dress and the language. I have a number of books just on my shelf about that. And you're like, so we do agree that like your chromosomes and your anatomy and your appearance and your social roles can all be different. And that if we were to use the definition of a woman as somebody that uses the label woman, it seems like, oh, that's not a great definition. But then you're like, and then you have all these transvestigating things with the Olympics in the middle where it's like, well, they look manly. So, but then you're like, well, I thought we were going off of chromosomes here. But then if you go off of chromosomes, then you're like, well, it's proper that a woman does blank. So it's like, so being a woman isn't just the chromosomes. You got to wear your like ankle length dress to mass and be submissive in the home. Like, I would agree that gender has this whole social element. I disagree with the Catholic version of what those elements have to be. But in a funny way, traditional Catholicism has the best point that sex and gender identity are two very distinct things.
No, it's so true, because they will be the first ones to be like, oh, you're not a real man, or you're not manly enough, or are you a girl? Like all this stuff. Like, especially as gay people, you grow up and you're very aware that masculinity is a performance that you are not putting on properly. And it's like, in some ways, like that is exactly the same realization you get after reading like a bunch of queer gender theory. It's like, yeah, that a lot of gender is a social performance that you are putting on because it fits in with a certain social role in society. And that is what people are talking about when they talk about gender. And that is why we distinguish between gender and sex, which they also are bad about for some reason, that we distinguish between the two because they're different things. I don't know. It's like an utter refusal to engage in the actual topic on every level and just sort of buckling down on definitions that don't actually mean anything to them, that they don't actually believe, and that only serve them in whatever particular argument they're having at the moment.
Well, and furthermore, there's this weird conundrum if you're Catholic and intersex, is that if however you are identified could be determined. So if you marry somebody of quote unquote the opposite sex or the same sex, like, then you might be going to hell, even though whatever your sex has been determined to be, because Catholics need to have it perfectly determined. You could turn out, you get to the pearly white gates and it's like, I'm sorry, like you came to the wrong chromosomal test and you're going right to hell. Unlike in the modern view of the world, as long as your partner's consenting to the legal institution and to sex, it doesn't matter exactly how your tests go or what exactly you are identified as when it comes to being intersex. It's just like this weird, like, yeah, I maybe call myself a gender abolitionist, but in Catholic world, like you have to get to the bottom. Like, what do you do with somebody in 800 AD who's intersex? Like, they make the wrong marriage decision and they go to hell because they're technically having same-sex relations and not like, what are we talking about?
I think you would determine it on whether you could complete the conjugal act, which is the predetermination for marriage anyway. So depending on what role you take in that, I guess would then be your sex when it comes to your marriage, which also makes me always like, this begs the question for me. What if you have like, you know, a trans man marry a cis man and they both think they're gay? But I mean, what does the church say about that? I think the church would say that trans man is a woman, and they would just be telling on themselves if they were like, that's an abomination, because technically that's okay per your rules. Like, it's not consistent. And then he's like, the liberals don't have a consistent worldview all over this video. And I'm like, that is an inconsistent worldview right there. Like,
Yeah. Veronica, so Veronica and I have history with the Franciscan University of Steubenville. And Veronica has much more than I do, but I went to, I think, 3 Steubenville youth conferences at Franciscan University. And I remember there was the famous sexuality Thank you. The famous sexuality talk. I forget. I wish I remembered who the guy was, but he
I
was
could
talking.
find it for
and then
you if you tell me what what date it was. If you can find that, I'll find it.
I'll try to find it for you. I'll try to find it. But he opened the floor for questions, which big mistake, girl. Big mistake. And he opened the floor for questions, and somebody asked literally that exact question of like, okay, well, if somebody like transitions and then converts and then they want to get married, the speaker was like, and then he was like, well, you would go, he was like, you would go with like biological determinism, and you would only be able to like if you got bottom surgery, you would be able to like engage as a member of that sex because your organs are ordered towards that sex. And I was like, even back then, I was like, first of all, I don't think that this is orthodox. Second of all, I don't think the orthodox position is even correct either. Like, so I was like listening to it being like, it was like that Mr. Krabs meme where he's like, I was like, I had no idea what was happening, and I was so confused, and I went up to my youth group leader, and I was like, so this person gave this like weird answer, basically kind of weirdly affirming trans people, and my youth group leader was like, yeah, that's wrong, and I was like, but your opinion is wrong too. So it was so like, there are no answers. These people have no answer, like definitive answers for trans or intersex people, even when they convert. So like, essentially it's just kind of a hodgepodge.
Honestly,
very unfortunate.
It's honestly kind of sad, because I think what they do is they still treat queer people as a whole, as this like other, that, oh, now straight people are concerned for them, so we have to address it, and so we'll give an answer. But when it comes to an actual queer person in front of you being like, what do you want me right now to do? I don't know. Like, I don't have an answer for you. You're not supposed to be here by my like rubric, you know? And there's just, the sad thing is that the real answer they'll give is, hey, you probably shouldn't get married because we better err on the side of caution.
Right.
Because that's the real thing they'll tell you is, well, if it's all complicated, better safe than sorry. So just be single forever and alone, you know, because they love that.
Yeah.
So that's the real sad part.
And that's where I think Trent's gotcha questions get turned around as gotchas to him, because in, let's say, a liberal worldview, when we talk about what do we do in complex situations, we can investigate what's happening. We can figure out what leads to a fulfilled path. Do they have the ability to consent? Do people consent? How do we want to shape this in society? Like, when you actually live in reality to figure out what's good for people, like, you can change according to what the research says, and you can make these complex determinations. But in Catholic land, when the rubric doesn't start off on the right notes, then the rest of your rubric falls apart, but then we can't actually investigate it or make choices for people's well-being. It has to be according to this non-existent well-being, which is just kind of like ethereal that we bring in when there's research for us, but then well-being kind of gets thrown out the window because we don't really have well-being. We have this different standard, which is like God's truth. So it's just like this weird infinite rabbit hole without any answers at the end. So in our worldview, definitions can change according to how we define things. In Trent's worldview, he needs these perfectly fit boxes, except he doesn't as soon as you actually investigate them. Any other commentary on this question before we go to 5?
No, let's do it.
What is a person? And yet we have many people who will say they'll support legal abortion, for example, because they'll say a human being in the womb is not a person. Or at the other end of life, you have people say that someone who is in a so-called persistent vegetative state, someone who has minimal consciousness or a lack of consciousness, is not a person. If you're so confident the unborn are not people, you have to know what a person is in order to disqualify them. Now, here's another.
Which, this gets funnier. I think we hold our commentary because you're like, oh, like we should probably define a person, which is like, oh, that's a great endeavor. Let's see how Trent Horn answers the question first before we throw our hats in the middle.
Now, here's another trap answer. The trap answer is to say, well, a person's a human being, because it's possible there can be persons who are not human beings. Like if an extraterrestrial visited and they acted like us, we'd say they're a person. Is Spock a person? Or to pick an example that really exists, angels. Angels are persons, but they're not human beings. we have to have a broader definition.
I mean, that's what it really is. Yeah, we got to consider Spock when we talk about persons. We got a whole 30 seconds left of Trent rambling about what a person is.
Broader definition, then. I like this one. A person is an individual member of a rational kind. So an alien, an angel, you, me, an infant, an unborn child, even a person with developmental disabilities who will never be rational in the future is a member of that kind. Rational kinds like humans matter because they're created in the image of pure rationality and perfection itself. So a lot of these questions get you to more fundamental.
He just said there are people who will never be rational because they have a developmental disability. I don't think that's how it works, Trent.
I'm so stuck on the people turn around and don't answer with a person is a human. No. Well, what about the aliens and the angels? Like, there's no interfacing with. Like, these aren't like serious legislators talking about like how do we want to define things? Like, are corporations persons? Are people persons? Are naturalized? Or are undocumented folks? Are they persons? Like, these questions involve fairy tales like angels and Spock. Like, this isn't a great discussion because this is where it ends up in. Let's talk about angels. Like, what are we doing?
Give someone an handle too.
First of all, Jimmy Aiken is like, yes, you brought up aliens.
Living.
I wonder if they've ever talked about aliens before. I would love to see that. But
can we just pause? What is with the Catholic obsession with theorizing about aliens?
Because they know what's going to happen. They know what's going to happen.
I think it has a lot of influence.
They're preparing
on
the answer.
Yeah.
Because how did Jesus save them? Right? There's a whole Thomistic Institute talk about if Jesus' sacrifice would have applied in a different galaxy with like semi-rational or hyper-rational beings. Because then the whole Catholic thing falls apart. Like if Adam and Eve weren't like screwing monkeys in the garden and then gave birth to the first real children, like we gotta like really flesh out our fairy tale here. Because like, what about other galaxies? Because then it's like, so did Jesus' sacrifice only apply to our planet? Like, we need to know these answers. Let's ask a Dominican, which is how every bad story starts.
Well, it's like
it's C.S. Lewis's space trilogy.
Yep, exactly. So I was gonna say, like, that's literally the whole conceit. And then the even like South Park, when they were making fun of the Catholic Church, they had like the alien Catholics delegation appear, and it's like it's a well-known trope enough that even like South Park is like in on it. I don't know, it's just weird. I feel like it should be talked about more.
The real question is, are the aliens celebrating the extraordinary form or a hope? That is the real question.
Sacred language, whatever the aliens have. Ooh. Do aliens have sacred languages? Did their alien Jesus have different languages above his cross, and therefore those became sacred languages? These are the questions we need to know.
If there's multiple,
before we can answer what a person is.
If there's multiple like incarnate rational kinds, are there multiple disincarnate rational kinds that are like other kinds of spiritual beings out there too? Like, the doors are open. People, like, we should start investigating. This is why I think Mormons have more fun with their theology because they talk about this shit all the time. The Catholics are always stuck on, what is a woman?
Yeah.
Let's well, first of all, it's funny when Trent talks about a person. If the unborn were persons, I think it was in Colorado that there's basically a bill that's like, so if the unborn are persons, like, then you should be able to claim them as dependents. You should be able to ride in the fast lane, the carpool lanes. Like, we should have conception dates. Like, there's all these questions when you're like, a 1 second old fertilized egg is a person because it's a member of a rational kind. Like, things go absolutely crazy. Like, in the legal sense, a person really is just defined as an individual or a corporation, or persons for the purpose of law, which is like a whole other rabbit hole. But nowhere in any country have unborn fetuses or zygotes or embryos been defined in the same manner as folks outside of the womb, because they're not individuals in a certain sense. And then it's like, but then he says rational kind, which is like, what IQ do we need Like if we gave dolphins crack and they could pass an IQ test above 70, like are dolphins persons now? Are rats if they get really good at sniffing bombs because we put too many landmines in the ground in Cambodia? Like are they persons or members of a rational kind too?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, there's plenty of animal species that exhibit like metacognition, abstract thinking, use of tools, like all these things that we used to think are like specific hallmarks of humankind. And like the reality is that like human intelligence is just as natural as animal intelligence, but like you can't accept that as a Catholic because you have to believe it's sort of specially created through the soul or whatever. So they can't really concede that point. So they're always going to make some sort of arbitrary distinction between humans and animals.
Yeah.
But the truth is that there really isn't it's a distinction of degree, not of kind. You know what I mean?
It's again not a binary. It's it's bimodal. But I was going to say that this whole alien discussion also opens up kind of a more sinister side too, where it's like, okay, what if we don't deem them to be of a rational kind? Can we enslave them morally? Like that's a valid. That's what I'm saying is like, so if we don't perceive them as rational, or if they like if they're intelligent enough to get here, but we still somehow find a way of figuring out that they're not rational in the same way that we are, that opens the doors up for like Adam's dominion, right? Of like, well, we can name them now, and so they belong to us. And I find that to be kind of a concerning portent, you know?
And how do angels interface with our pro-life movement? This is why Trent Horn, like as you get further into this video, you realize that the Catholic Church is fundamentally set on controlling the U.S. from a governmental perspective. Like they're not interested in having a cool prayer service here and there, or a bunch of early morning Advent masses. Like that's the primary aim is not that. It's, well, we need to have a legal definition that includes aliens and angels and 1 second old fertilized eggs, all in the same thing. Unlike if we look at a traditional legal understanding of what a person is an individual, or is a legal individual, which is, it's such a weird question where that's why I was like, we just got to let Trent answer the question first before we take a shot at it. Because, like, can you imagine you go to the floor of Congress and you introduce a bill, like amending it to allow for persons to be aliens and angels and the unborn? You imagine his omnibus bill or his pork barrel legislation where it's like, do we just vote on funding for bridges and also a spot cane? He would be a human too.
It's clear he thinks he's like so clever, like cutting things off at the head. He's like, oh, no, a bad answer would be a person with XY chromosomes or XX. It's broader than that. Oh, it's a person isn't just a human, you know? What if there's aliens are real? Like those are persons. So it's clearly like, I gotcha. I am smarter than the liberals think I am. I know what they're going to say. And I already have the perfect answer for that. But then the answer he comes up with is like still not compelling, you know? Like, but he thinks he's so clever.
And he also said he likes the definition of, or his definition, with the... We got 2 more questions, see.
Yeah, right before we finish this one, I want to point out what you said about nowhere has there ever been a country that defined like a fetus, like a single moment of conception fetus as like a person. And that's even true of like ancient Israel in the Bible. Like the legislation we have, the law codes that we have, the only place that addresses sort of fetal personhood is in, I believe, Exodus. There's law prescribing that if a man kills a pregnant woman or hits a pregnant woman and she dies, the man is put to death. It's like for like, punishment equaling crime. But if he hits her and she miscarries, he has to pay a fine to the father of the child, because the fetus is considered a property loss for the father, not a person. It's like a unanimous reading of the text in like scholarship. So if you even look in the sacred text that they hold as definitive, it's not even an issue.
Or they're like, could it not be more clear where it says, I knitted you in the womb, and therefore we're introducing all this legislation? It's like, that could not be any more muddy. And then also, I knew you before I formed you is like right before that. So it's like, then it'd be preventing sex also be a problem because God knew you both before you were in the womb and while you were being knitted. Yep. It's like, so yeah, these are the questions. We need Trent Horn back for 7 questions Trent Horn can't answer. Any other commentary before number 6, which we're taking a left turn into way different topics.
So here's question number 6 you'll have a hard time answering. For those who are sick or who have these handicaps, they'll often defend assisted suicide or euthanasia. And so I'll ask them, can you tell me what is death with dignity? Can you spell that out for me? What is death with dignity?
And so the part that I cut out here is he goes, so is dignity having the option to be able to end your life early? And then he's like, well, if that's the case, if you were blown up in Afghanistan and you didn't have the option to die, did it mean you had an undignified death? Which is like a whole other rabbit hole that he goes down. We got another 15 seconds of Trent, which is like such a, he's in the Catholic world, all these issues are integrally connected between abortion, between gay rights, between transgender rights, between assisted suicide, and billionaires in Finland because of oil money are all, it could not be more connected. To the outside world, like if you're not Catholic listening to this, these questions seem like a splattering. In the Catholic world, these seem like a really good cross-examination where you're building, because all of these in the Catholic world are just integrally connected, because obviously chromosomal abnormalities and medical assistance in dying, basically the same thing, folks.
Where we disagree is you think an inherent element of a dignified death is the ability to commit suicide on your own terms. Gives one dignity. So I have a follow-up question to that. Okay, who should be allowed to choose physician-assisted suicide? So here you can point out, where do you draw the line? There's nowhere to consistently draw it.
Which, if we remember Trent Horn's earlier answers about how gray cases or cases in the middle don't actually negate his definitions, now all of a sudden he wants an absolute definition that'll never change around the legal ramifications and requirements to be able to get medical assistance in dying. So what is it? Do we need definitions that never change and are perfect? Or do we need definitions that work on the gray space over time according to what a country would like? Which one is it?
See, this one also, I have to say, it really frustrates me the way that a lot of Catholics talk about this issue, because it's a very difficult issue. It's not an easy cut and dry situation, like there's plenty of people who are perfectly morally, sound and wonderful people that can disagree on the issue. But I think where the Catholics come in is that they want to apply their understanding of this issue as a blanket prescription for everyone else. And I do think that, so just not to get too personal or whatever, but like I've had family members where like they've had like very severe illnesses where there comes a point where you have to sort of make a choice, and sometimes they can make that choice, but a lot of times they can't make that choice, and you have to make a choice of, do we continue offering healthcare that we know won't heal them, but may prolong their life, but in a way that's very likely to include a lot of misery and suffering? Or do we sort of let them pass away? And that's an extremely difficult decision to have to make. And it's something that a lot of people do have to go through. And I think you'll find that Catholics actually end up on, just like everyone else, on both sides of this issue, depending on where they are, and they're happy to be that way. For example, my family, we had a family member who had severe cancer, and they had to make that decision. They chose to let him just pass away. And you can say that was right or wrong, but it's a difficult decision, and I don't think that it should be anyone's business to get in there and stop people from having those, difficult conversations with their family members and themselves. And I think people should be able to have agency in that process, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I hate how flippant they are about it, and how it's like, oh, it's clearly cut and dry. Like, you just want to murder people. And it's like, this is one of the most difficult things that anyone ever can go through. And it's something that everyone struggles with. And I feel like they just treat it like it's these like psychopathic people trying to murder people. It just really irks me.
Because anytime a Catholic talks about this issue, they're going to go to these cases where they talk about suicide capsules and people with mental illness, which is like, that's a whole conversation in and of itself. But then they'll talk about the cases in Canada where a lady's passed away of bone cancer, which is incredibly excruciating. And the Catholic hospital she was in, she didn't want to be here anymore. And I think if somebody's within a few weeks of the end of their life and they have bone cancer, which is shredding your body from the inside, and if she's able to have made that decision to end her life early, I don't see what the problem is. And I think the big thing here is the discussion around autonomy and being able to consent. Like, obviously, a young person, Trent brings up the case of, well, if a young man broke up with his girlfriend, should he be able to kill himself? And then he'll get you stuck on that question before you can get stuck on the question about what about people that are going to die here in a few days? And Catholics always talk about, like, well, you can withhold extraordinary medical support, which is essentially just starving somebody to death if their body's no longer able to digest food. So you can let your grandma starve and dehydrate to death on the hospital bed, but if you overdose on morphine, if you have too many painkillers that kill her, if you have any sort of medications that'll end her life early, it doesn't matter if she's going to die of dehydration 3 days from now. Well, it's different. It's the same thing with the Catholic whole shtick on abortion, which is like, well, for an ectopic pregnancy, we're just going to remove the fallopian tube. And we know it's going to destroy the ectopic egg at that point. And so it's like they're just like putting a glove on and then ripping the same thing out versus just taking the thing out. Like, it's such a weird set of circumstances. And Trent always wants to go to these middle cases. And then you're like, what about the thousands of people that are dying of brain cancer and their brains are just being pressed into their skull and they're dying, or ALS, or all these things? And the answer is like, if somebody has insurmountable odds and it's reasonably certain and they have the ability to fully consent, like, it's a decision that you can make. But what Trent Horn wants to do is to come into your grandma's hospital room and he's never heard anything about her case and go, what does the catechism say? Paragraph whatever says this. And you're like, shut the fuck up. Like, this is my grandma. She talked about this before she died. And she was able to make a decision.
Yeah. But also, I think it's worth talking about how different it is, because you mentioned Afghanistan and a soldier. They will be the first person to line up and say, isn't it lovely for a person to like die in battle? Which, you know, if that's a sacrifice you want to offer your country, like, I'm not going to throw slander at that. That's, you know, very noble. But how is that materially different? How is I will choose to put myself in a situation where the likelihood is that I will die for X, Y, Z reason? How is that morally distinct from someone being like, I'm going to choose to put myself in this situation in a hospital where I will probably die? Like, I don't know. Like, it seems like when it comes to someone doing a macho, masculine, manly thing, they're like, oh, it's wonderful, it's great. But if it's someone who's suffering and in pain, they're like, absolutely, we can't do anything to help them. I don't know.
I think they would cite charity as maybe the reason that, like, the basis of
I would
military
charity in the other place.
I would argue that too. Yeah. Yeah, I remember there being, actually, this is actually one of the reasons why I left the Catholic Church. This is like a huge issue for me because somebody that I know, and I've had to respect her dignity, I won't say her relation to me, that I have loved since I was very little and we were very close. She was a very strong Catholic. I remember she got a diagnosis of like just very serious, like stage 4 life-ending terminal cancer. And I just remember her telling me, like, I wish there was a way that I could choose. I wish there was a way that I could just choose. And I just, like, that was so devastating to me. Like, I think I was maybe 16. I just remember feeling so devastated because I couldn't, like, there was nothing that, I was still Catholic at that point, and there was, like, nothing I could say other than, like, I know I'm sorry, like, and it was horrible. She suffered for months, and it was awful. And it just, like, I wish these people would actually do what Jesus asked, and maybe visit the sick, like, and like see people in situations like this before making extremely blanket designations, like moral designations about it's such a complex and difficult issue, and it just feels like so flippant, like, well, we can't just let people kill themselves, and it's like, okay, well, that's not really what's happening, and I think they know deep down that that's not really what's happening, but they have to present it that way because this is an apologetics conference. Yeah.
What's the dangerous thing about theocracy is that Trent Horn is not invested in your well-being. He's not invested in your story. He's not invested in your autonomy. He's not invested in your experiences, nor anybody's experiences ever. Like, even if Trent Horn couldn't bring up these cases in more of this gray area, he's not interested in like looking at what's happening, of understanding what we can do for people. What are the options on the table? Let's weigh how this is going to impact society. That's not how Trent Horn makes his decisions. That's not how the Catholic Church operates, is according to well-being. They operate according to what they think that their divine agent has commanded, and that will never change. And no cases will change Trent's mind. No situations. And like I said, if you get a diagnosis and he walks into the room, he already knows what he's going to say. Like, he's already fully made up his mind about what you can and cannot do according to the government, versus you talk to a doctor and it's like, awesome. Like, let's figure out what your situation is. Let's see what options are at the table. Let's evaluate what decisions you want to make and then come to a conclusion. Trent Horn and the Catholic Church walk into your bedroom, into your hospital room, into your house, into your lives, and tell you exactly what you can and cannot do, regardless of any data out there. They are not interested in that.
I think the devout Catholics will even say that suffering has dignity and redemptive meaning because of Christ's passion on the cross. At least people who are less like legalistic, more actually trying to find things that don't just give you cognitive dissonance and make you sound like a jerk, is what I hear a lot. But my question is, I thought Jesus died so we didn't have to suffer and so we could be saved from needless suffering. So why require people to have really painful deaths? And he says, like, well, what is a death with dignity? See, you can't even define it. And I think it's like everyone's been saying, like, not subjecting people to more misery than they already have to go through when we have means to prevent them from having to suffer that or assist them, especially when they have a choice. But of course, nobody cares about consent in the Catholic Church. It's not about that. It's about the rules. And even like his dichotomy about, well, where is the line at which point you won't allow physician-assisted suicide anymore? How do you qualify? You can't figure that out. It's too gray. I think it's the same thing they say about abortion, why you can't have abortion ever for any reason, no exceptions, because where do you draw the line for that? And when you start talking about, well, at what week do you stop allowing abortion? At what medical issue, how serious does it have to be for you to be permitted to step in to save the life of the mother? Like, and so then they just throw out the question altogether and say, well, that's too complicated to figure out. Let's just outlaw it altogether, instead of letting people have nuance and make their own decisions and come to their own conclusions about things. Especially considering not everyone is Catholic and going to accept your answer about what Catholics should or shouldn't do. That doesn't mean the whole country should make it illegal.
Yeah. And this was the whole issue with like Mother Teresa too, is like she was in a sense kind of mandating suffering for her religious reasons, despite like 90% of the people that she was treating or helping weren't Catholic or Christian. So it's like you're like, it just is like, it's this, you cannot legalize, or you cannot mandate your views on the merits of suffering on other people. You just can't.
What's weird in the Catholicism, to an extent, is a death and suffering cult, because they do not care about alleviating suffering. They only care about doing what their God says. And so if it's a 14-year-old victim of rape who's pregnant, they don't care how much suffering happens, because it doesn't matter. Like, suffering and human well-being is not part of the Catholic equation at all. If you read the Summa, if you read the Catechism, They are not interested in weighing the options that are on the table and looking at the effects and figuring out what's happening. It does not matter how much suffering you will go through, they will still shove their religion down your throat. No matter the situation, when it comes to end-of-life care, when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to marriage, all these things that Trent talks about, when he brings up these questions, a lot of people might start answering them, but Trent Horn's fundamentally not interested in dialoguing. He's interested in cross-examining you to get to the same conclusion. So when you give Trent hypotheticals, when Trent talks about his position, he's not here to like, oh, let's think about that. He's already thought about it. He already knows his answer, and he's just waiting to trap you. And that's why I think religion and politics is especially terrible, because they will look at the catechism and then figure out what their bill should be. They're not interested in debating the bill. They're interested in debating what does their God want. And then whatever space is left, then we can debate things instead of what is good for humanity. And so when Trent Horn talks about end-of-life decisions, like if somebody has, it's reasonably certain that somebody has insurmountable odds and they have the ability to fully consent to it, they should have the option. And Trent always tries to frame this idea as if like the liberal Canadian Justin Trudeau pride government hospitals are going to start putting you down once you get a cold, like a horse on a racetrack. That's like the caricature of this, is that Justin Trudeau and his drag queen outfit's going to come to your house and put down your children, is like the narrative here, which is it's such a wild thing. Like, you should have the option on the table for end of life decisions. And Catholics also have this weird thing with this gray area of like when it comes to extraordinary medical care. It's like, what is extraordinary medical care? Oh my gosh, there's gray area too there? That's crazy. Oh my gosh, like we have new medical technology and techniques that have different effects, and like we should take our decision-making rubrics in account of what's on the table. That's crazy. But no, you're stuck in the 1400s with Thomas Aquinas thinking about things that he had no idea of.
Like why do we have ecumenical councils? Because there's gray areas for everything and we have to decide. Like, why are we even talking about any of this? Like, if everything has already just been decided and everything is just completely, it's a multiple choice. Like, you have 3 options and there's nothing else. So then why are we discussing it? Why are there theologians who are arguing about things? It's because everything is a gray area.
And on that note, that brings us to question number 7 that I'll play here.
And here's the last question. When I'm engaging people on subjects, especially liberal audiences, and they tell me, well, Jesus would never say that. Jesus doesn't care about homosexuality. Jesus doesn't care about abortion. I ask them, who is Jesus? And in particular, is Jesus God? And if the person says no, I'm going to say, well, then we can't even have the same conversation because you're talking about a false Jesus. And if not, I'm not going to have a debate with you about Christianity because you're not even fulfilling the basic tenets of Christian faith and doctrine.
So basically, shut up.
And yeah, his whole video is about Christianity.
I mean, so to be fair, he's saying he's not going to listen to an internal critique from someone who isn't Christian in however he defines that. Which, like, I guess I get, but I also think that's kind of that's not what people are, like, people are trying to say that within your own logical framework, your ideology is inconsistent. That's what they're trying to say when they bring up, like, Jesus wouldn't care about this or Jesus blah, blah, blah. It's saying, like, well, you have people that you value and they seem to have a different attitude. And his point is, like, essentially, you're too dumb to talk about this. Shut up. Which, like, I'm not gonna lie, like, sometimes it's fair, people don't, but a lot of other times, people know a lot about what they're talking about, and a lot of biblical scholars will tell you that, like, Jesus wouldn't have given a shit about like things like abortion or whatever. You know, like, there's plenty of, like, people who are very knowledgeable about this stuff who aren't, like, professing Christians who can speak competently about what Jesus would or wouldn't have said, most likely. I mean, like, there's an entire thing called the Jesus Seminar that was, like, a whole bunch of biblical scholars getting together to be like, what do we think Jesus actually said? They're not all Christian, but that's, like, something they still talked about. So I don't know, like, it's just sort of a dogmatic refusal to engage with people that he doesn't already, like, consider worthy of his respect.
It's also it's also very Steubenville to bring up the, like, who do you say that I am thing. You know what I mean? Like, that's it. That's the immediate, like, the default, like, question to to like anybody who's like, Jesus was a socialist. Like the default question to ask is like, so who do you think Jesus is? Who do you say Jesus is? And it's like, girl, I don't know.
It just goes back to like
That's right. I agree with Trent.
it just goes back to the fact that like everything is just divine revelation and you can't use logic to come to a conclusion. You get your conclusion from revelation and then try to fit logic, whatever. Because if you're saying, well, I read the Bible and I think Jesus XYZ, and you're like, well, you're not a real Christian, and you don't agree with me about who Jesus is, so you can't even interpret his words correctly. I'm going to get all my interpretation from the same types of people. I mean, bringing up Franciscan, they don't give weight to the historical critical method, which is by far like the standard of interpreting scripture. People really put onto the text their theological worldview and the way the Catholic Church has already interpreted it. But saying, oh, well, we're taking it for what it is. But when you compare it to like any other academic work, like very different. And it feels so like intellectually dishonest for him to ask all these questions and say, well, your worldview is inconsistent. And then us try to say something like, well, I see this is inconsistent in yours. And he's like, well, what you say doesn't matter. And I'm like, well, so what you say doesn't matter to me because we're also not meeting on terms. It's not a gotcha, Trent.
This is where we say, this is why you don't get to legislate your personal views over the entire country, Trent. Because you don't understand how everyone's world works.
That's where, like, this is a question. It's not a question that I can answer. It's a question that I don't care to answer when it comes to any of the other related questions. Like, who was Jesus? I don't really care. Like, if I'm interested in history, like, it's a fun research rabbit hole to go on to. But if somebody's like, pick an answer of who Jesus was, I don't care. In the same way that like you don't get grilled over historical figures from 2,000 years ago. You're like, so which version of Pontius Pilate is correct? Isn't it? Like Catholics have a lot of different answers. Or like, what were the ramifications of Genghis Khan upon the Asian continent? It's like, oh, I don't care. Like, it's a cool question that some historians should be answering. I don't see how this question has any weight on the previous one. So like in Trent's 7 questions, we have like the first one is just conservative talking points. The whole time, like it's just conservative economics, which is a different discussion than apologetics. And his last one was like, well, if you don't know who Jesus is, like we can't really answer the other ones. And then these other ones are fundamentally coming from his worldview that the Catholic Church is correct on anything. Like he didn't come to his pro-life position because of science, as Catholics love saying. They're like, we know this because of reason. Like if you grill them, they can never change their mind because God already told them. Like Catholics love talking in the secular space about these topics until you like exhaust their options, and then they retreat back to the same ideology that they had. And Trent Horn couldn't change his position on any of these topics because he'd lose his job. And same thing with any apologist out there. They can't come to different conclusions because they lose their job. Apologetics is the one field in which all the conclusions are already there for the rest of your entire ministry, and you're just backfilling in reasons to get there or trying to paper mache with the facade of the secular idea. And when you think about like in the liberal movement, what do we do with the economy? Like what should the tax rate be? What social programs do we have? Like you can have debates and people can change their mind. And like, but in the Catholic world, if you come to the wrong conclusions, you get kicked out of the church. Like you lose your job, you lose your family, you lose your friends, depending on how adherent of a group you have, if you change your mind, which is to say that you can't change your mind based on any evidence and that you just have to reinforce the religious institution. And you get any of these apologists in a different room where they're talking to a Catholic audience, they say exactly that. And then they go to public and then they have the exact same conclusions and then try to like backfill what they were talking about. It's an inherently dishonest ordeal, and it's fundamentally a theocratic one and not secular. So anytime a Catholic talks about politics, understand they will not change their mind no matter what evidence shows up in any circumstance.
Is YAF a Catholic organization?
Nope.
Okay.
It's just political. It was started by Bill Buckley Jr., who was just a conservative guy who founded a whole bunch of conservative organizations. They have chapters at high schools and colleges. I'm actually friends with the president of the chapter at my alma mater. They're very conservative. They host like conservative ladies' teas, or like there was a dance they hosted once and we went and like all the decorations were red, white, and blue, and they were like little memes, not memes, but like a picture of Abraham Lincoln with a quote on it cut out of printer paper and like stuck on the walls leading into the field house as like decorations. It was all very patriotic. Giant red and blue beach balls being tossed around. It was like aggressively America. Anyway, so that's Yaf. Just to
So he's doing a mix of like Thomistic Catholic apologetics with like the first question, like basic conservative, like money and like anti-socialism propaganda, and then you don't know who Jesus is, shut up. So it's like this weird hodgepodge for his like conservative audience, who are 90% of them are probably just like evangelical, like young white men. So it's like, what are we doing? What are we doing?
It's a big thing. Like Taylor Marshall has gained a number of converts to the church through megaing his way around town. Like Catholics will try to basically say, well, join our movement because it turns out to be Catholic, like you're dogmatically required to believe everything that Yaf talks about. And so they'll do the mega shtick. They'll go to the Jericho marches. They'll do all these things. And Trent Horn in the years talking to a bunch of evangelical frat guys and going like, Catholicism is cool because now you get to bludgeon your opponents over the head with Thomism, which is cool because we have all the real knowledge. And you also have like Timothy Gordons of the world that are like, did you know that the conservative U.S. government is actually based on Catholic ideals? Never mind the fact that like you couldn't really be a Catholic founding father and like, but like really the root of everything, it's not the Magna Carta, it's actually the Summa when you think about our legal system. So that's like So he's trying to basically bring all these people in with an ideological bludgeoning tool and keep them locked down. Because if you're just kind of like a secular conservative, like you can change your mind. Like you might have bad ideas and harmful ideas, but like you can change your mind. But if you're a religious conservative person, you can't change your mind unless you change your entire sense of belonging. So it's kind of, once again, this barb in real time where you start going conservative and then you might go back and forth and you hit the religion thing and then you're just like stop and get sucked into amber like the mosquitoes in Jurassic Park.
Well, I have nothing to add to that.
Well, on that note, that's end of episode 1 of Trent Horn being very clearly a theocrat. This is episode 1 of Non-Catholic Answers, which we did some counter apologetics. We made a lot of quips, so I'm sure somebody's offended. If you're Catholic and listening to this, yes. If your priest listening to this, he probably would tell you to go to confession, but who cares? So, yeah, tune back in for more sassy takes that'll offend the pants off of you, and we get to figure out who the real snowflakes are. And the answer is Father So-and-so is the real snowflake. How do we end this thing?
Take care.
Yeah, I do not claim views expressed by all my co-hosts. Co-host views are their own.
Especially Cade.
Yeah.
I'm off in crazy land.